Okay, hold on. Let's be clear, this is big because while everyone else is busy yelling over each other about polls and rallies and whatever insane thing Trump said this morning, something much more dangerous just landed. And somehow, for reasons that completely escape me, the political world is pretending this isn't the most devastating legal and political blow Trump has faced since the day he became a defendant. Jack Smith's final report is out. And look, Trump's defenders can spin, they can deflect, they can do their usual witch hunt routine, but none of that actually matters when the special counsel leaves behind a written record that says in plain English that Donald Trump resorted to crimes to stay in power. Yeah, crimes. You know, those things he keeps insisting he's the victim of, even as the evidence keeps confirming the exact opposite. And here's the wild part. Trump wanted this buried. He wanted this dismissed, ignored, memory hold, anything but spotlighted. But now it's here, it's public, and it's not going away. Because this isn't commentary, this isn't opinion, this isn't Democrats being dramatic. This is a federal prosecutor saying we investigated the conduct of a sitting president and here is what the evidence shows. And I'm sorry, but when the special counsel lays out witness testimony, internal communications, sworn accounts from Trump's orbit, and then concludes that the president of the United States resorted to crimes, that is not something you hand wave away with a Truth Social post written entirely in caps lock at 3:12 a.m.
But here's where this gets even messier for Trump, not for you, because the second this report dropped, all the old talking points fell apart. Jack Smith has nothing. This is a political hit job. There's no evidence. Yeah, then why did Jack Smith file an entire sealed appendix of evidence that Trump's lawyers tried and failed to keep out of public view? Why did prosecutors outline in detail the pressure campaign on Mike Pence, the coordinated strategy to overturn state results, the private conversations where Trump was told he lost, and said, so what? So what? That's the mindset of someone who believes rules don't apply to them. And now, in a stunning twist of irony, that exact mindset is the thing blowing up his political future. And Trump knows it. You can see it in the frantic statements, the contradicting excuses, the immediate pivot to victimhood. This is a man who understands that even though the courtroom battle is technically over, the public battle just entered its most humiliating phase. Because here's the thing no one on his team wants to admit. Jack Smith's report didn't need a trial to destroy Trump. The evidence itself does the job. The findings do the job. The quotes, the testimony, the timeline, they do the job, and the Republican Party knows it. The donors know it. The moderate voters know it. Even the MAGA influencers pretending everything is fine, they know it too. And yes, we're going to walk through all of it. The sealed evidence, the resorted to crimes conclusion, the immunity argument collapsing in plain sight, and the very real political ruin Trump now faces because the truth is finally undeniably out. Stay with me, because what's inside this report is worse for Trump than anything he's faced before. And we're just getting started.
If there's one thing that always blows my mind, it's how predictable the Trump operation becomes the moment real evidence surfaces. Every time, without fail. The pattern is so painfully obvious at this point that you could write it on a flashcard and hand it out to political science students as authoritarian reaction 101. You drop facts, they scream persecution. You show documents, they yell witch hunt. You produce sworn testimony from Trump's own people, suddenly everyone is a deep state plant. It's a routine, a tired one. And Jack Smith's report blows straight through it because this isn't a memo or a leak or a TV hit. This is the special counsel's final assessment of Donald Trump's behavior, preserved permanently in a government record, immune to spin. And here's what makes this uniquely brutal for Trump. Most Americans never read indictments. They never read motions. They never read the nuanced technical filings that prosecutors drop into federal dockets at 11:47 p.m. But a special counsel's report, that's the kind of thing that breaks out of the legal world and enters the political bloodstream. And Trump doesn't have the tools to put that genie back in the bottle. You can feel his panic in the contradictions. One minute, he's insisting Jack Smith is a failure who had no case. The next minute, he's insisting the same Jack Smith is part of the most powerful government conspiracy in American history out to destroy him. Which one is it? Is he an incompetent clown or a criminal mastermind? You don't get to have both. But that's the thing about panic. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to fill time while you desperately hope people stop asking questions.
And questions is exactly what this report guarantees, because once the public sees the phrase resorted to crimes attached to a former president, the conversation changes completely. That's not hyperbole, that's not spin, that's prosecutors summarizing their findings. And remember, this isn't coming from the Biden White House or Congress or CNN commentators. This is coming from Jack Smith, a career prosecutor who is almost cartoonishly apolitical. The guy is essentially a walking embodiment of bland institutional professionalism. He has the personality of a law library. He is the last person on earth who uses inflammatory language. So when he chooses to describe Trump's conduct as crimes, you know something crossed a line. But the real political damage doesn't come from that phrase alone. It comes from everything wrapped around it: the evidence, the testimony, the timeline, and the unmistakable pattern that emerges once you stop looking at Trump's claims and start looking at what people around him were actually saying. Take Mike Pence. And look, I get it. Pence isn't exactly the most charismatic figure in American politics, but when the sitting vice president of the United States documents in writing that the president was asking him to break the law, you have a problem, and not a small one. Because even if you strip away the emotions, the politics, the noise, what you're left with is a constitutional command. The vice president does not have the authority to overturn an election. Period. And Trump knew that. He was told that by lawyers, by advisors, by Pence himself. And it didn't matter. Because when Jack Smith says Trump resorted to crimes, he is describing the moment Trump pushed forward with a plan that everyone around him told him was illegal.
And here's the part that really matters. Even though the legal case isn't moving forward in the courtroom, the political consequences are still moving forward. Because this report doesn't disappear. It doesn't get sealed again. It doesn't fade into the background once the indictment is dismissed. It's sitting in the public domain, waiting to be quoted, examined, fact-checked, repeated, turned into attack ads, hammered into the political conversation. The legal mechanism may not exist anymore, but the record does, and Trump can't outrun that. In fact, the panic you're seeing from his orbit isn't because they're afraid of arrest tomorrow. They're afraid of the public finally catching up to the reality that Trump's conduct wasn't chaotic or misguided or impulsive. It was intentional, deliberate, planned, coordinated, and supported by a mountain of evidence that didn't go away even though the trial did. And because the GOP refuses to acknowledge that reality, they are now trapped completely. They can't defend the evidence, so they attack the prosecutor. They can't defend the testimony, so they attack the witnesses. They can't defend the timeline, so they attack the process. This isn't strategy. This is desperation. And desperation becomes even more obvious when you remember what's actually inside the sealed appendix. Let's pause there for a second, because people hear sealed evidence and assume it's some vague mystery file with redacted sentences and dramatic black bars. No, the sealed appendix Jack Smith submitted is a comprehensive evidentiary ledger. It includes transcript excerpts, communications, first-hand accounts, internal memos, and witness statements that Trump's team fought tooth and nail to keep out of public view. And if Trump's lawyers weren't terrified of it, they wouldn't have tried so hard to bury it, period.
And here's where the political danger becomes catastrophic. Even without seeing the full contents, the public already knows what category of evidence is inside, and that's enough. You don't need line-by-line detail to understand the implication of sworn testimony from Trump's own inner circle. People don't panic because someone says sealed. They panic because sealed means there's something inside they don't want voters to see. And now that the special counsel's report is out, Trump no longer has the shelter of ongoing case, can't comment. Everything is fair game. Everything is public. Everything is politically usable. And the Republican Party is going to spend the next year trying to outrun a document they can't rewrite. Let's talk about the immunity angle, because this is where Trump's team decided to gamble and lost spectacularly in the court of public opinion. They thought that if they could argue immunity in court, that would give them a talking point. He can't be charged, therefore it wasn't illegal. But that's not how immunity works. Immunity doesn't say you didn't do it. Immunity says you can't be prosecuted for it. Totally different. And as far as voters are concerned, that difference is enormous. Because once you're arguing I can't be punished, you're basically admitting I did the thing. Jack Smith's report highlights that contradiction beautifully. The special counsel doesn't hide behind theory. He lays out the acts. Then he lays out why those acts weren't official presidential duties. And then he lays out why those acts were criminal in nature. Whether or not the Supreme Court's ruling created legal barriers doesn't change the underlying conduct. And Trump knows that, which is why you're now seeing him pivot to it was political. He cannot rebut the facts, so he attacks the motives.
And this attack fails because Jack Smith is not Adam Schiff. He's not an MSNBC host. He's not a Twitter personality. He's a special counsel with a decades-long record of prosecuting war crimes in The Hague. The idea that this man woke up one day and said, you know what, let me risk my entire career to go after Donald Trump because I don't like his policies, is laughable. Trump's defenders keep trying to sell that story, and voters are looking at the evidence and saying, yeah, I'm going to go with the guy who documented everything under oath. And that's what Trump faces ruin actually means. Not jail tomorrow, not handcuffs at dawn. It means the permanent, irreversible destruction of the myth he's been selling to his base for years. The myth that there was no plan, no intent, no knowledge, no wrongdoing. That myth is gone. Jack Smith shredded it. And here's the part that's honestly astounding. Even people who don't follow politics closely are starting to get it. You can see it in polling. You can see it in suburban shifts. You can see it in the way independent voters are talking about exhaustion and chaos fatigue. Trump's legal escape doesn't erase the evidence. It doesn't erase the record. If anything, it makes the exposure worse. Because now, instead of a trial where everything is structured and procedural, the findings are being judged in the chaotic world of public opinion, a world Trump cannot control no matter how many times he posts in all caps.
And we're only scratching the surface. Because if you think the resorted to crimes line is devastating, wait until we get into what the report actually documents about his pressure campaign, his knowledge that he lost, his conversations with state officials, and the testimony from people inside his own operation who quietly admitted what was happening. That's where the political earthquake truly begins. The thing about political scandals, real scandals, not the made-up nonsense Trump world cycles through every week, is that once the underlying truth becomes clear, everything else starts snapping into place. And that's exactly what happens when you look at how Jack Smith documents Trump's pressure campaigns. Not just the one on Pence, not just the one on Georgia. I'm talking about the whole ecosystem of pressure. DOJ officials, state legislators, local canvassing boards, advisors, staffers, even private attorneys who told him straight up, you lost, you cannot do this. Every one of them becomes another thread in a web that Trump spent months pretending didn't exist. And now that the report lays it bare, the picture is unmistakable. Because remember, Trump didn't just wake up on January 6th and go, let's cause chaos. This was a process, a long one. And that's what makes the resorted to crimes conclusion so damning. It's not describing an isolated outburst or a moment of poor judgment. It's describing a sequence of events that was deliberate, strategic, and meant to overturn the will of the voters. And once you understand that timeline, Trump's entire defense crumbles. Start with what we now know about his internal conversations after the election. Advisors told him he lost. Campaign staff told him he lost. His data analysts told him he lost. Bill Barr told him he lost. Senior DOJ officials told him there was no fraud. Republican governors told him he lost. Courts told him. Judges he appointed told him he lost. And the only people telling him otherwise were fringe lawyers who saw an opportunity to hitch themselves to a delusional plan. And even they admitted behind closed doors that the theories had no legal basis. And here's the kicker. Jack Smith documents all of it. He lists the dates, the names, the meetings, the briefings, the memos, the statements. He built a case that Trump wasn't mistaken, he was informed. He wasn't confused, he was corrected. He wasn't misled, he was warned. And once you see that pattern, you understand why Smith framed it the way he did. When someone is repeatedly told something is illegal and pushes forward anyway, that's not ignorance, that's intent. But let's focus on one specific moment that has become the centerpiece of this entire conversation.
Mike Pence refusing to overturn the election. People underestimate how big a deal that moment was. Pence isn't exactly a rebel. He's not confrontational. He's not someone who jumps into conflict. For him to defy Trump publicly means he was cornered legally. Pence said in not-so-subtle terms, "My job is to follow the Constitution." That shouldn't be a controversial statement, but in Trump world, it was treated like treason.
And here's where Jack Smith's report lands its heaviest punch. The prosecutors document that Trump told Pence he was too honest. Too honest. Imagine saying that to the vice president of the United States. That's not a policy disagreement. That's not a strategic debate. That's a confession. It's one of the clearest indicators of intent you could possibly get. Trump wasn't looking for a constitutional interpretation. He was looking for someone willing to violate the law for him. And when Pence refused, the pressure campaign intensified. But that's not even the shocking part, because the report goes beyond the public moments we all saw and digs into private conversations that fill in the gaps. Internal communications from Trump's advisors show that they knew the plan wouldn't work. They admitted they were buying time. They admitted the legal theories were weak. They admitted they were struggling to convince judges who kept rejecting every argument they brought forward. If this were a movie, this is the part where the camera zooms out and reveals that the villain's plan was collapsing behind the scenes the entire time. And now, with the report out, that behind-the-scenes collapse is public. That's what faces ruin truly means in the political sense. The gap between the story Trump tells and the reality Jack Smith documents is so vast that even his own supporters are finding it harder to bridge. Because you can convince people of anything until the receipts show up. But let's move to another piece of the puzzle, the false elector scheme. This is where Trump world tied itself into legal knots trying to justify something that was never justifiable. And Jack Smith lays it out with brutal clarity. The electors weren't alternate. They weren't provisional. They weren't placeholders. They were fake. And the plan was simple. Submit fraudulent documents to Congress and to the National Archives so that the pressure on Pence would be even stronger.
Now, think about that for a second. Imagine the outrage we'd hear if a Democrat tried to submit fake electors. Fox News would be running 48-hour specials. House Republicans would be having hearings on the half hour. And yet, when it's Trump, suddenly it's a technicality. That's the hypocrisy Jack Smith rips apart. He doesn't editorialize. He doesn't moralize. He simply documents. And the documentation is devastating. This is why Trump's defenders don't want people reading this report, because it removes the spin. It removes the politics. It removes the performative outrage. It leaves only the facts. And the facts are brutal. They show a president who wasn't fighting for democracy. He was fighting for himself. They show a president who didn't just question the results. He actively sought to overturn them using methods his own advisors warned were illegal. And the effect of having that in writing from a special counsel is politically catastrophic. Trump can scream on stage, he can rant online, he can call Jack Smith every name in the book, but he cannot undo the written record of his own actions. That's the part that terrifies him. That's the part that terrifies the GOP, because this isn't going away. You can already see the political fissures forming. Republican strategists quietly, behind the scenes, are acknowledging that voters, especially independents, are sick of the chaos. They're sick of the legal drama. They're sick of the excuses. And now, thanks to the Jack Smith report, every new scandal Trump gets caught in is connected to a documented history of wrongdoing. There's no more isolated incident. There's no more misunderstanding. Everything connects. Everything compounds.
And this is where the public opinion danger explodes. Because think about what it means to have a special counsel accuse a former president of resorting to crimes to remain in power. That's not just damaging, that's defining. That becomes the lens through which every future controversy is viewed. When Trump lies, people assume motive. When Trump lashes out, people assume guilt. When Trump calls himself a victim, people assume spin. Once you lose control of your narrative, you lose control of your political future. And here's the irony. Jack Smith didn't need a trial to win the political war. The report is the victory. The evidence is the victory. The testimony is the victory. And Trump's meltdown response, confused, frantic, defensive, is proof he knows it.
But let's drill deeper into the sealed appendix because this is where the pressure on Trump becomes unbearable in the political arena. Even though the public can't see every detail inside that file, they know exactly what kind of information it contains. Witness transcripts, internal conversations, communications from aides, testimony from people who were in the room. That alone is enough to shift the political gravity. And here's why. It destroys plausible deniability completely. Once people understand that Trump's own circle testified, the whole deep state conspiracy narrative collapses. Are we really supposed to believe that every person who worked for Trump, every advisor who saw the inner workings, every aide he handpicked suddenly became a traitor? At some point, the conspiracy theory becomes so bloated that it collapses under its own weight. And Jack Smith, intentionally or not, built the perfect factual record to make that happen.
But the most dangerous part of this for Trump isn't the legal argument, it's the moral one. The report forces Americans to confront a simple, unavoidable truth. Trump knew he lost. He knew the theories were false. He knew the pressure was illegal. And he did it anyway. Once voters internalize that truth, Trump's entire political identity begins to crumble. And that's why, even now, with no trial looming, Trump's political operation is desperately trying to counterpunch. They know the report is a time bomb. They know every journalist, every debate moderator, every political opponent can now quote Jack Smith's findings verbatim. And they know that the phrase resorted to crimes will haunt Trump in every political conversation moving forward. And the GOP knows it too. They just can't say it out loud. What really seals Trump's political vulnerability here, what truly cements it, is the way the report forces everyone, including Republicans, into a corner. Because once the findings are public, you're either on the side of documented facts or on the side of blatant fantasy. There's no middle ground left. And every time Trump opens his mouth and screams witch hunt, he's basically reminding the public that his entire defense collapses the moment someone asks, okay, but what about the evidence? And here's the thing. Politicians can survive scandals. They can survive bad headlines. They can survive investigations. But what they cannot survive is the moment the public realizes they were lied to over and over and over again. Once trust breaks, it doesn't come back. Not for independents, not for moderate Republicans, not for suburban voters who already feel exhausted by the drama. And that exhaustion becomes politically lethal when a special counsel report lays out in painstaking detail that the chaos wasn't an accident, it was a strategy.
You know who understands that better than anyone? Republican strategists. The ones who don't go on TV, who don't tweet, who don't join MAGA rallies, the ones who read data, the ones who track suburban erosion, the ones who saw what happened in the midterms. Those strategists are looking at this report and seeing a giant flashing warning sign. Trump's legal drama is no longer a legal problem. It's a political one. And political problems spread. They affect fundraising. They affect candidate recruitment. They affect turnout. They affect down-ballot races Republicans desperately need to win. And that's why you started seeing quiet, cautious distancing from the same Republicans who once treated Trump as untouchable. Because once Jack Smith's findings become part of the permanent narrative, supporting Trump becomes harder to justify. You can't shrug off documented evidence. You can't pretend you never saw the testimony. You can't pretend you never read the report. And in politics, the worst position to be in is defending the indefensible, with millions of voters watching. The meltdown we're seeing from Trump right now, his flailing, his contradictions, his attempts to insult his way out of this, it all comes from the same place. Fear. Not fear of prison. Fear of exposure. Fear of being stripped of the myth he's built around himself. Fear of voters realizing that the strongman persona he sells is nothing but a shield for wrongdoing. Because if there's one thing Trump cannot handle, it's the idea that people might see him not as a strongman, not as a nationalist warrior, not as a victim of some elaborate deep state plot, but a man who got caught. And the report makes that unavoidable.
And what's fascinating, and honestly pretty predictable, is how quickly his allies pivot to rewriting history the moment the report contradicts their narrative. Suddenly, Mike Pence was weak. Suddenly, Bill Barr was rhino trash. Suddenly, everyone in Trump's orbit who told the truth becomes an enemy. It's the same loyalty test Trump always imposes, loyalty to him over loyalty to reality.
And the report exposes that dynamic better than any commentator ever could. Because think about what it means when your defense requires attacking every single person who worked closely with you. Every advisor, every staffer, every cabinet official who refused to break the law, every Republican figure who wouldn't go along with your plan. At some point, the story stops making sense. The villain list gets too long. The conspiracy theory becomes too absurd. And voters might be willing to excuse a lie or two, but they're not willing to excuse a universe where everyone is lying except Donald Trump. That's not a defense, that's delusion. Jack Smith doesn't need to say that out loud. He simply shows the testimony. And when you see it stacked together, Pence, Barr, state officials, campaign advisors, the pattern becomes inescapable. Trump's entire defense hinges on pretending none of them said what they said. But once those statements are in a government report, preserved forever, that strategy stops working.
And there's something else here that's even more damaging to Trump's political future. The timeline. Trump has always relied on chaos. Move fast, create noise, drown out the criticism with something new. But you can't outrun a timeline. You can't outrun a sequence of events that shows you were told something was illegal and you did it anyway. You can't outrun documented warnings, documented refusals, documented instructions. Timelines are kryptonite for people who depend on confusion because they force clarity. They force the viewer to see the cause and effect. And that's exactly what happens when you break down this report. It strips away the fog Trump hides in. It makes everything linear. It shows the progression from denial to pressure to escalation to illegal strategy. It reveals motive. It reveals intent. And the political impact of that kind of clarity cannot be overstated.